So we are recording. Some new information has come down the pipeline regarding the crime scene. So today I'm presenting an amended analysis to include this new information. So we're going to reassess crime scene signatures. Okay, so for people unfamiliar with this case, Abby and Libby were two teenage 8th grade girls from Delphi, Indiana. On the 13th of February 2017, they went for a walk on a public trail and were found murdered the next day, not far from their last known location. This presentation is not meant to sensationalize the murders of Abby and Libby. It's not meant to stoke any unnecessary fear or point fingers at any groups of people. This presentation is just meant to inform and provide more information on the subject matter. So today's discussion will primarily be focused on the runes found at the crime scene, which is the reason for this revision, and then hopefully better explaining my method of analysis and interpretation as far as looking at the runes and their structures. So why examine occult symbolism to begin with, right? As I mentioned in my previous video, very credible people, organizations, professionals, they've all made statements, sometimes whole reports, dealing with connections to occult or pagan beliefs or practices. So, we have the idea of Robert Ives, the former prosecutor from Carroll County, saying in an interview that in his mind there were at least 3 signatures found at the crime scene that were non-secular in nature. We also have the Odin report, the quote-unquote Odin report, which was really an 85-page investigative report done by a multi-task force group that identified people in the nearby area and in Delphi who were known practitioners of Asatru and what they had gotten up to during the time that the girls were murdered. We also have the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit determining that the individual or individuals responsible for the homicides had ties to or knowledge of Nordic beliefs. And of course, we also have comments made by a professor of Germanic Studies at Purdue University and a fellow colleague from Harvard, both saying, when looking at the crime scene, that it was without a doubt, quote, someone trying to replicate Germanic runic script, end quote. So, why are we examining occult symbolism? Because there's a pretty good reason for us to, in that it is very likely present at the crime scene. So the following images and descriptions are upsetting due to their nature pertaining to the murders of Abby and Libby. So, as we go over it, I will show my method for my new conclusion. But what I figured out in recent days, probably in this past week, that this new information has been presented through a very reliable source, and there's very good reason to now know that the stick on Abby's right shoulder isn't really on her. It's in the forefront or the foreground of the photo. And many people have included it because the most accurate rendition to the crime scene that we have is done by true crime design. So it does throw things off, and it does change. It obviously changes the runic bind rune, but at the end of the day, it did not really change the meaning behind the symbolism. So this is an excellent reminder to remain flexible and to reconsider what this new configuration might mean. So now that the stick configuration left on Abby has become the very noticeable Haggle rune, the Haggle rune is found in the younger Futhark, and I'm definitely going to go over the different Futharks in the next couple of slides, because there are more runic alphabets to consider now. So yeah, we'll be looking at probably the 3 most common ones, but excuse me. So also I wanted to, for the sake of transparency, let it be known that I did make modifications to the original source, this original artwork, and I just wanted to show the things that I had modified or taken out. So these images are graciously borrowed from the YouTube creator and artist True Crime Design. There were some added modifications, such as the removal of the ground and landscape around the girls, and that was mostly for clarity's sake, to be able to see the bigger picture. Sorry, I have a cat attacking me. So I removed that to make it more visible what the girls were positioned in and where the sticks were. And then I removed facial features, and I removed the logo on Abby's sweatshirt, and I did take out the sticks or twigs that were above Abby's head, because they are the contested horns, antlers, crown, halo that nobody seems to agree upon at this time. And I don't know if that bears anything, but anyway. So the original image did include black sensor strips over Libby's pelvic and chest area, and I removed those to better see positioning of her body. But I did modify her body to be more featureless and less graphic, just for the sake of everyone. But despite these alterations, I'm very grateful that True Crime Design chose to make and share this image, as it's the most accurate rendition of the crime scene available to the public, and no disrespect was meant by any alterations. So yeah, now we will go over a lot of the runes. I'm going to do a brief history of the runes. It may be tedious, but it's probably necessary in order to understand some of the conclusions that I came to, and to factor in more of the different runic variations over time too. But briefly, we'll just say that the Norse runes date back to the early centuries of the Common Era, so there are many different versions of it, and this isn't even all of them. These are just probably the most complete and definitive versions of them. But runic alphabets are called Futharks, or Futhark, and Futhark just derives from the first 6 letters of the runic alphabet: the F for Fehu, the U, the U for Urus, the TH sound for Thorisas, the A for Anzus, the R for Raido, the K for Kenaz. So the earliest Futhark, the Elder Futhark, dating to 100 CE, Common Era. It began with 24 letters or runes. It was followed by the intermediate phase, which lost 3 runes to 21, and that was then followed by the late Old Norse runes. And that's roughly about 200 to 400 years after the Elder Futhark starts petering out. So, in between the intermediate phase and the late Old Norse runes, there is a emergence or development of the Anglo-Saxon Futhark from England around the 5th century CE. And I'll show that in the next slide. That alphabet has 28 to 33 letters, and it's quite different from the Norse runes. So, there is a connection between the Younger Futhark, which is also sometimes called the Viking runes, the Viking Futhark, but also called Long Twig, Danish runes, whatever you want to call them. This took place around the time that the Viking writing really started to take off, and it was probably due to exposure to new peoples and new languages that this very much reduced alphabet becomes the standard, because we've gone from 24 characters as late as 400 CE to 16 characters circa 700 CE. So within a 300-year period, we're losing eight runes between them. So basically, after the Younger Futhark becomes popular, there are some variations of it that coexist alongside it. They're kind of the easier shorthand version way of writing them. But come the 12th century or so, Latin becomes standardized, and it kind of puts an end to runic alphabets, at least, for common folk or the everyday person, because many of these writing examples and the Futharks do survive through, the research done by linguists and people looking into the old writings. But the Old Norse, especially Icelandic texts, have been preserved, and way better preserved than something like Celtic, which was mostly a bunch of oral traditions that got passed down. Well, the Norse mythologies and the Norse writing systems and all of their stories and legends, those things got written down in abundance, way more so than many other pagan cultures. And so, in a sense, the runes did very much survive till today. It goes through the hands of some people looking to modify it or revive it for a certain thing. But overall, we have a bunch of variations, a bunch of different iterations of the runes. They change, they go through a metamorphosis, and they still survive to this day. So we're primarily going to be looking at the Elder Futhark, which was the only Futhark I was considering in my previous video. But once that extra stick is taken away from Abby, it becomes apparent that, we are in fact looking at a hoggle. And the hoggle is present in the Younger Futhark, and it's present in the Anglo-Saxon Futhark. So we're probably going to have to consider those two alphabets now alongside the Elder Futhark. And also, just briefly, I want to say that I got a lot of this awesome information from ScandinavianArchaeology.com, and the article was written by Lavisa Senbi Passe. I'm sorry, I am mispronouncing that, but it was a great resource, and I encourage anybody interested in more history on this to visit it. So let's go on to here. We have the runes, a magical writing system. Well, first of all, I just want to caveat and say the runes are a magical writing system, but they were originally an alphabet, you know. This would be a lot like us using the Latin alphabet and, you know, tossing an A, the letter A, in a disc form on the ground and seeing it and being like, oh, A for abundance, you know. We could easily do this with probably any phonetic alphabet. You know, it would be difficult with you know, say like a Chinese or Japanese writing system where they have a bunch of different characters to represent different things. But when it comes down to a phonetic alphabet, you could probably make your own divination system with anything. So, like I was saying, in the previous presentation, I was limited to the runic letters of the Elder Futhark. But with that removal of the branch on Abby, the Haggle does become clear. And the Haggle is basically just the younger Futhark version of Hagalaz, which is what I initially thought was on Abby to begin with, was the Hagalaz. So, but I did want to come and make this correction and show that, yes, now that I am having to factor this in, even though I'm sure the H's could have been written this way in the Elder Futhark as well. But I wanted to come here, include more runes, show that there are more variants and more variations of the runes to show that, yes, there are a bunch of different runes and that there are a bunch of different variations, and we should probably try to either, you know, probably try to eliminate them as much as possible in forms from what we see at the crime scene. So, a brief history of probably more of the modern, the 20th century approach to runes, some of the movers and shakers, and this is by no means an exhaustive list because we would be here for hours if it was, but we have Guido von List. He was an Austrian occultist and nationalist, okay? He did die in 1919, so I don't think he was a part of any swastika wearing group at the time, but he was heavily influenced by Aryan traditions. And you know, we'll see in a lot of the early 20th century does include occultists who are very interested in this idea of Aryanism, or linking back to theosophy, which has a lot to do with transcendence and ascendant masters, and that in of itself is another rabbit hole. But Guido von List kind of comes out of this time period, and he writes The Secret of the Runes, and that plays an important role in shaping the perception of runes as mystical and magical symbols. So, and his ideas and interpretations of the runes were controversial and not universally accepted, but they would later be revisited and revised by neo-pagan movements. And just because he probably did not include, I have not read this book, but he probably did not include a lot of the historicity of the runes or the mythology behind it. So that's probably where this controversial, not universally accepted idea is coming from. And then, of course, we have J.R.R. Tolkien because, I mean, his Hobbit, his Lord of the Rings, I mean, they're legendary, right? And he's taking from a lot of Germanic and Norse legends. So he incorporates a lot of runes and symbols that are, runic in nature into his works. I mean, I think he developed his own languages for many of the different groups of people in his stories. So he made it cool. He definitely made it cool. So another guy, I don't have his picture here, and he's still alive. His name is Idrid Thorsen, and I think his real name is Stephen Flowers, but he uses the pseudonym Idrid Thorsen, or both of them are pseudonyms. Whatever the case is, Idrid Thorsen has written a ton of books on the runes and magic, and he is probably more from a ceremonial magic kind of background, but he did found his own guild called the Rune Guild, and it was an organization dedicated to the study and practice of runic traditions, and it has played a role in fostering a community of individuals interested in the esoteric aspects of the runes. So we also have Freya Aswin, and she is a British occultist, and she's contributed to the revival of runic magic and divination. Her most popular book is Northern Mysteries and Magic, Runes and Feminine Powers, which I did use a lot when I was going through a lot of this research. But it definitely explores more heavily the magical aspect behind the runes. And she does use a lot of allusions to Norse mythology and Germanic mythology, but if you're not well acquainted with the mythology and you're not looking for the more metaphysical, spiritual, magical elements of the runes, I don't know. I would still recommend this book, but it might not be the very best to start off with. If anybody would be the best, in my opinion, if you just want a very straightforward, solid all-around guide to the runes, I really prefer Montfort. Montfort is my favorite, and I'll show you my sources because I forgot to do that in the previous video, but he's on there, and Diana Paxson. By far, hands down, those are the guys if you want to learn about the runes. But I also want to just quickly talk about Nigel Pennick. So he's a British author and scholar, and he's written on various esoteric topics. Like I've got his magical alphabets, and then runic lore and legend. He's written another book about the runes I don't have, but he also did the Pagan Book of Days, which is just awesome. It goes through, not only like previously Roman, European, pagan feast days, but it also goes through like early saints' feast days, and it's a great resource to have. I really like a lot of his stuff. He's a very detailed, thorough author, and he's always good at incorporating the history and context into things, which is wonderful. So I thought I would have to touch on this again, and this is kind of now we're reverting back to the geometry consideration of this, because a bind rune is the combination of two or more runes, and it becomes a single symbol, like this very much recognizable Bluetooth logo here is just the combination of the Haggle and the Berkana, and that's basically what a bind rune is, but I just want to show you how to maybe better recognize and differentiate runes within a bind rune, and to make it known that it's not always going to be simple to see, and that the runes aren't always going to be in their most identifiable form when drawing or like looking at a bind rune. So Bind runes and other magical staves have become a popular form of spell work in modern neo-pagan traditions because they're pretty easy. It's kind of like writing your intention out for a day. Those, like journals have that where it's like, today is the day about, gratitude. Well, you can do a bind rune. You can draw it on a little piece of paper and stick it in your pocket, or stick it in your backpack, stick it in your purse, whatever. So it's kind of a way of possibly working on yourself, as is a lot of some of these more magical neo-pagan traditions are just really self-improvement. But so bind runes then are, you're choosing different runes and you're putting them together so that you are focusing on a specific magical intention. And bind runes can be worn as amulets, charms, or they can be ritually imbued with magical energies. Let's say you get a really cool ritual candle for your altar. I was going to say knife, but I was like, I don't know how to carve anything into a knife. If it's a wood handle, maybe, but a candle would be easier. And you are setting the intention for, I need to get to my spring cleaning, or I need to clean out the energy of the house, or whatever. You carve a little runic bind rune of, maybe something like protection or strength for, so that you don't get worn out by the overwhelming mass of cleaning. I don't know. I think you see what I'm trying to say. But anyway, the use of bind runes varies from person to person. Typically, its meaning is known only to its creator / wearer or carrier of the bind rune. So, for people just learning to draw bind runes, it's easiest to start using the most recognizable versions of the runes in their normal upright positions it's usually right facing. So, normally upright means not reversed or inverted, and usually right facing. So I just did a simple compilation here. I tried to get all of them. I don't know if I did, but I tried. And I just went through to show these are the asymmetrical runes throughout the three, the three futharks that I'm going to be going over today, that are right-facing and asymmetrical. And what I mean by asymmetrical is that if you were to flip it on its side to side, not like flip it on its top or bottom, but side to side along that vertical axis, these would not be the same in the mirror. They would be the inverted versions of themselves in the mirror. Whereas if you were to flip this guy on his side, he would be the same in the mirror. Exactly the same. So that's what I mean by asymmetrical. They wouldn't be the same when you're witnessing them in the mirror. They'll either have changed structure or direction or whatever. So, and these are the right facing runes as far as I was concerned. There's no hard, fast, and rule on this. This is just my interpretation of it. And these guys all appear to be facing right to me. So, I apologize if that doesn't look like it's facing right to you, but it's facing right to me, and that's what I'm calling right facing. So when I talk about symmetrical, I'm talking about, unlike asymmetrical, the symmetrical can be flipped side to side, in the middle, on its middle axis, right here, the vertical middle axis, and it will look the exact same in the mirror. So, all of these different guys. Now, keep in mind, some of these are overlapping too, okay? There's going to be overlap, but then we have this asymmetrical, undefined orientation. This was just me being like, I don't know. I can't tell if they're right facing or not, but I know that when you flip them on their side, if you flip them on their vertical axis or horizontally, they don't look the same in the mirror. Like, these diagonal lines will be going in the other direction, okay? All of these guys will be going the other direction. And then this top, I don't know what you would call it, like little arrow, would be actually on the it would be on the top over here. Yeah, this top arrow would be on the top over here, and it wouldn't be pointing left, it'd be pointing right. And then this bottom arrow would actually be on the left here, okay? So all this to say is that it can be difficult to perceive. Sorry, my cat. Simba, you okay? Shh, come here. It can be difficult to perceive individual runes with the bind rune, especially when runes are not in their most recognizable form. So sometimes bind runes may include runes drawn in their reversed or merkstave position or inverted mirrored form, and we'll go over that in the next slide. But this may be less common for a beginner just learning to draw bind runes, but bind runes with abnormally drawn runes may indicate that one, the artist is inexperienced with the runes, two, that the artist is very experienced and taking artistic license, and three, that the artist may be intentionally concealing the meaning of a bind rune. And in the case of the third option, the artist would be familiar enough with the runes to attempt a confusing composition. So now we'll go over the reversed and inverted runes. I went over this in the previous video, but I figured this would be helpful to probably show it better than I did in the previous video. So practitioners of runic divination have different opinions on how they read the runes. Some will dismiss the reversed or merkstave positioning altogether. Like if they draw a rune and it's upside down position, they will just read it as if it were right side up. But, other practitioners consider runes that are cast or drawn in their reversed position, the upside down position, to have an opposite interpretation of the original runic meaning. So, for example, if the rune Fehu represents abundance and bounty, reversed, it may represent a lack or not having the right amount of something. So, as is shown in the reversed column here, some runes keep their original form even when drawn upside down, such as Hagalaz and Nautis. So if we flip them upside down, this is what they would look like. They would look exactly the same as they do in their upright position. But then, and for clarification, I'm using inverted to mean mirror opposite, okay? What it would look like if it were in the mirror. So, but if we come over here to the inverted Therisas and we flip it on its axis, right? It will not be different from its reversed form. So when Therisas is drawn upside down, it looks like it's facing left. But also when it's in its mirror position, it looks like it's facing left. Okay, so that's what I mean by inverted. And it's possible to draw or sketch the runes inverted. A physical set of rune discs carved or burned into wood, like these guys over here, or even printed, like a rune deck card over here, you'd be unable to show the runes in their inverted forms because they're already predestined that way. Unless certain runes like 30 says here, that particular rune appears inverted in its reversed position as well. So you either get one of those runes to have it show up inverted, so to speak, or you draw it. But as I was trying to show here, this is the card and the disc in its normal position, right? Its upright position. This is what it looks like when it's upside down. And it's reversed Merkstave position, okay? But then we've got this. This is when it's inverted or mirrored. And this version of Fehu cannot be physically selected by hand from a deck of cards or rune discs. They only appear as they do in a mirrored reflection of themselves. Like, you can only see this in a mirror. So this would never physically show up for you. But that doesn't mean that you can't draw it this way, right? That's basically all I'm getting at. And I just want to mention too, the Fehu Rune Oracle card is courtesy of the Golden Rune Deck by Tarot Oracle Boutique. Okay, so with all of that now, behind us, I'm sorry, that was a lot. Now I can kind of better describe to you what I see at the crime scene. So with a more accurate rendering of the crime scene and the new information, the stick and figure runes don't drastically change. So we are losing the left vertical stick on Abby's right, which was just an object in the foreground, and it got carried over into True Crime Design's portrayal of it because, they didn't know that this was in the foreground. So the original configuration on the left, it factored in this foreground object, and now that it seemed unnecessary, I do need to make this amended configuration because there is no left vertical stick. And I can definitely see what the defense had described in their Frank's memo as the asterisk or the Hagel rune. And the Hagel exists within the Younger Futhark and Anglo-Saxon. It doesn't mean it didn't exist also in some variation of an Elder Futhark, Elder alphabet. But, I wanted to play it thorough and get everybody just so that it made sense. I don't know. Anyway, okay. So we have more runic structures to consider now that I've made 3 alphabets basically, kind of the jumping off point of what can be seen. So I did initially consider Abby to have the 3 uniform sticks deliberately placed over her. There were 2 that were parallel positioned to her roughly, and I called those the vertical sticks. And we know this is now in the foreground, so now we just have 1 vertical stick, 1 diagonal stick, and 1 horizontal stick. So I still believe Libby's stick rune to be Urus, and that hasn't really changed, but and I do consider that both girls still kept their figure rune, and that didn't get altered. But with more alphabets to factor in, I did have another letter to consider, because this could be Nauti's inverted of the Nautis of the Elder Futhark, but now we can possibly get the letter R, A-R, from the Younger Futhark. So, again, just briefly, the red, what we see in red is going to be what I call the stick rune, and the way that the girls were positioned, I am going to be calling the figure rune. So, the stick rune's in red, figure rune's in blue. And also, I wanted to thank people who did give me some feedback on what they saw, and suggestions have been made that the sticks on Libby could be a form of the Elder Futhark Hagelas. So I want to keep this in mind. I'm not going to take that off, um, the list of considerations. So, oh goodness, sorry guys. It's here. Okay. And then I did have to consider that there may be an algaes in combination with Abby because of the contested horns or halo or whatever it is. It wouldn't necessarily be a part of her figure, but it would have added to another potential rune with the combo of algaes sticks, the algaes crown sticks, with the figure, this long figure of Abby. And then also dagas. I did consider dagas, but it was difficult to tell how Abby's arms were positioned. So I just wanted to let you know what I am keeping in mind for the future. And so we know that stick is in the foreground, the stick on Abby's left. And again, I'm calling, the sticks that were deliberately put on each girl the stick rune. And I'm calling the way that the perpetrators position the girls the figure rune. So I also want to say I am very aware of the insensitivity of attributing the willful actions done to them as being theirs. I do this only for the sake of clarity. It shouldn't have to be stated that what was done to Abby and Libby was not their choice. Therefore, I apologize for attributing the runes to them. But my method for finding the stick rune for each girl involved comparing the uniformity of the sticks. The sticks considered had a similar length and or similar thickness. I did not factor in the shapes of the sticks, which I'll go over in the next slide. Oh, wow. Wow. Computer gods don't like me today. And I will factor in the shapes in the next slide. I will go over what I was willing to talk about. But for Abby, there's now just 2 uniform sticks that are similar in length and thickness. We've got this one vertical one that's pinning down her left shoulder and her arm and her leg. And that's the vertical stick. The horizontal stick is the stick. It's been positioned over her neck and her folded or tucked up arms. They're both uniform in length and thickness. Then there is a third shorter stick right here, which I struggled with in the previous video. It's shorter in length, but of similar thickness to the other sticks. And the shorter diagonal stick bisects the point of the vertical and horizontal sticks. So in geometry, whenever you get the intersecting point of 3 lines, it's called the point of concurrency. I had to look that up. I was not good at geometry, but that's what that is. And when you go to look through all the other runes, whether Elder, Younger, Anglo-Saxon, the only one that fits that description is the Younger Futhark Hagel rune, which we'll also see as, I think it's like Yor in the Anglo-Saxon alphabet. But it was this shape, okay? So for Libby, of the 3 uniform sticks, 2 are positioned parallel-ish to her, and those are the vertical sticks. And then, and let's see, the left stick, the left vertical stick, or Libby's right, pins down her right arm and right leg. And then this third stick, the horizontal stick, crosses perpendicularly over the vertical sticks. And Yeah. So geometrically, the stick rune was found through a process of elimination. The first step was finding a rune which had two parallel vertical lines. So, in the Elder Futhark, there was Uruz, Hagalas, Ekvaz, and Manas. And the Younger Futhark was Sol and Sigal. And Sigal is just the same structure as the Younger Futhark Sol. So then I had to find a horizontalish line that ran perpendicularly to the vertical line. So I needed something to kind of go over the two lines. And these were the ones that I came up with. But I was able to pretty quickly strike out the Sol and Sigal because they were just too steep in their perpendicular line to qualify as, horizontal. Then Manas I was able to eliminate because it required more geometry than what was available. And I was able to eliminate Ekvaz because it needed a noticeable dip in the middle of the horizontal line. So it needed to have gone more like an M shape here. So then it came down to Uruz versus Hagalas. And ultimately, I'm still going to go with Uruz, just because I have to choose one. But I'm not saying Hagalas is impossible. Okay, so basically, for Hagalas, when I'm ruling out Hagalas, the reasons that I'm bent more towards Uruz than Hagalas was because the Hagalas perpendicular line was a bit more steep or angled than what this was, okay? And then, but that doesn't mean that Hagalas couldn't be written with drawn with a very shallow angle, even to a point of being perpendicular. So, but, that's where I began with Hagalas. And then this left vertical stick here on Libby's right, it extends further above this horizontal stick. So it does look like it's in the position to be for that first part of the H, But it says, it says the first, above the horizontal stick. This right vertical stick is what I would want, unless we are incorporating the stick and arm as being part of this longer line here. But again, that would have to be another presentation because I really only was looking at it through the angle of what the sticks were placed on them, and then also the just the way that their bodies were positioned. But it would be good to sometime go over and try to see, what else this could be saying. Because, like I was saying earlier, I could see dagas here if we're putting the arms in there. And then, I could see algaes if we're putting the horns back on her. I could maybe even see Burkana here reversed. But it depends, there's so many factors that go into it because was she left this way purposely? Or, had the body already gone through a process of rigor, and this is how she ended up, it's difficult to know, but it would be a good mental exercise to try to go through and find other things, because if this is part of that other, the extension to the other vertical stick of the Hagalas, then it could be more of a Hagalas, right? And that now everything can get very, very confusing. So, and we can also see kind of a Tarisas right here too, if we're including the arm and the stick. But I will say too, some of my thinking came down to the perpetrator is probably they're going to first put the girls down. And if they're going to try to make them look a certain way, they're going to do it when they lay them down. Then they're going to put sticks over them. So to me, I kind of took that as there's this opportunity to stage or pose the body, and then there's this opportunity to put a symbol over that posed or staged body. So that, yes, you could be considering the whole thing to be, together, where the sticks and the limbs of the body and everything, they're all meant to be read together. I kind of took them as separate actions. Because, especially if they're getting, it really depends on the time of day, and this is why I would need a whole nother presentation, but depending on the time of day, if it's at night, it would be hard to see. It'd be hard to see without a flashlight. If you bring a flashlight, then you might be more noticeable, and more people might still be out looking for people, for the girls. So, how and when were they staged? And, was it meant to be read as one giant thing? It seems difficult, it seems like that would be difficult in the dark with multiple people there, and trying to instruct them, if you have multiple people there, trying to instruct them to position the bodies a certain way. There's a lot to go over. So this is where I'm at right now, and I have a lot of other things that I want to present that aren't necessarily just about the runes. So, someday I may get around to that, probably not for a while. But I will address the shapes of the sticks, okay? Because here's why I did not go into super thorough detail with it. There was some reasoning behind it, but I also had a hard time telling what twigs were coming off of what branches. I can tell that this twig is attached to this branch, right? I almost can't tell if this is all one branch, I think they're two separate branches. But then there's this giant branch that I feel like is used to kind of hold down Libby's arm to make sure that it touches the tree, which would be somewhere around here. And I can't tell if there are twigs coming off this large branch, if there's a twig coming off of this vertical, smaller branch, and or if this twig is coming off of that one as well. So it was difficult to tell, and I would need to talk to somebody that actually had seen the crime scene in order to factor those in better. But I think the significance of the stick shapes depends on, one, the time available to the perpetrator or perpetrators, and two, planning. So let's consider that the sticks or branches were specially chosen for this double homicide. Then more time and effort had been taken to find and bring those sticks, to the final location where Abby and Libby would be found. It would be critical to get the opinion of an experienced dendrologist, like somebody who identifies trees, or a naturalist, to identify the species of tree or shrub of the sticks used on the girls. And maybe this information is already there. I don't know. I've just seen what was presented by the Franks. But considering the final crime scene was very near running water, which periodically floods, it is a high likelihood that trees in the area are better suited for marshy conditions. Meaning they can withstand periods of time when their roots are deprived of oxygen because they're underwater. But this then, asks the question of, what if the sticks placed on the girls were from a different environment? What if they were like pine trees? What if they were kind of a rare species that doesn't really grow around that part of Indiana? That would say something, right? It has potential to say something. So then we know the sticks. We would know that the sticks were then from a more intentional mindset, and we would have to factor in those shapes even more. So if they're far from far away, or if they are, well, we know one is deliberately cut, so that is kind of odd. But just sticking with this line of thinking, if there is a tree that's less common to that north central Indiana area, that would be important to know. And then the deliberate choice of sticks based on their shapes would definitely lend to the idea of a better planned attack, right? If you think about it, this would mean that a single perpetrator would likely deposit their sticks of choice nearby in what would be the final resting area of the girls, because if there's just one guy doing this and he's bringing a gun, to coerce control, and if he's bringing a knife to ultimately kill them, is he bringing branches? Well, whoever is approaching the girls on the bridge, we can't even tell if he has a fanny pack, but it doesn't look like he's, carrying a bunch of sticks. So, but anyway, so if they were deliberately chosen sticks based on their shapes, the person would have to be very planned. And so the only way I could see a single perpetrator doing this would be that they would have to find the sticks that they wanted to use, and they would have to deposit those sticks in a nearby area to where they would ultimately leave the girls. And, so I say here, if one individual had to bring a gun to coerce control over the two girls, and too close to fully grown or fully grown girls, to get them across a semi-deep, cold running water stream, or creek, or it's not a river, but it's not a river. I don't know how to explain it. Anyway, and they had to bring a sharp-bladed weapon to ultimately kill the girls. It would be very difficult to also bring pre-selected 3 to 4 foot, 90 to 120 centimeter long branches with them. So, but if we factor in more than one perpetrator, bringing pre-selected sticks also becomes more likely, because then there's another set or sets of hands. But randomly chosen sticks would likely be from the immediate area where they were found, where Abby and Libby were found. And again, a dendrologist would be very helpful for identifying the species of tree or shrub of those sticks. The sticks would more likely be randomly chosen if the perpetrator was less prepared. They just got it in their head that they were like, oh, you know what, I should leave sticks on them. They would probably have to look around for sticks. So the sticks would not be deposited ahead of time. There's a possibility that the single perpetrator took the time to look around the vicinity to find special stick shapes, but this seems less likely. You're probably, if this is all happening as quickly as, the death certificates say it happened or show that it happened, then this person is doing so much within such a short amount of time, and then they're going through the woods and looking for special shaped sticks. It just seems a little, anything is possible, so we'll keep it at that. It's less likely that they would be going around looking for specially shaped sticks. And then if other individuals were involved, they could have spent more time looking for particular stick shapes as well. But the problem with that, though, is that it would be more noticeable to have several people moving around in the late afternoon. And again, we're assuming that this is happening when the death certificates imply that it happened. And you would be able to see, many people moving around the late afternoon, the more visible and audible area, because the trees were barren. And the shrubs, everybody had lost their leaves. And it's mid-February in a wooded area. And people started looking for the girls kind of quickly. So considering the prosecution's theory that one person killed Abby and Libby in a short amount of time, then if the sticks were deliberately chosen, they would have likely needed to be previously deposited before the commission of the crime. And we can't really know if the sticks were specially or randomly selected because we don't know their origin. We don't know if they are from the nearby area, with maybe more marshy trees, or if they're from an area that, doesn't have that. So anyway, all this to say is that anything is possible. I'll have to do a separate presentation on the sticks. So, sorry guys. And also, too, I would probably include the contested crown, halo, antler, horn thing in that presentation as well. So for the figure rune, the figure rune is the intentional way that the perpetrator or perpetrators position the girls. And this is outlined in blue. And I apologize for attributing the runes to Abby and Libby. It is done just for the sake of clarity. Anyway, the figure rune for Abby was deducted through a process of elimination. As I went through my previous video, I took the professor's comments calling the perpetrator or perpetrators Odin fanboys to mean that the crime scene was in fact replicating Germanic runic script, but that it seemed juvenile or even incompetent to him, at least. So this statement was insightful because it implied that the perpetrator or perpetrators did not have an excellent grasp of the runes, allowing for the possibility that the runes could be found in their inverted or mirrored forms. So I was approaching this as like, it will look runic, and it may be runic, and it most likely is runic, but it's not going to be in its most obvious form. So I do want to say that there are caveats that exist because the perpetrator or perpetrators could feign incompetence, right? They could make it look like they don't know what they're doing. They could take artistic license, and that could just be like their grand way of expressing, I don't know, God. Or 3, they could be doing it to purposely confuse, to really, throw off what people could possibly consider, So for Abby, her right leg bent underneath her left leg here resembles an isosceles triangle, and the Elder Futhark runes with an isosceles triangle attached to a single extended vertical line are Thorizaz Raido, Vonyo, Berkana. Well, Berkana has 2, and then Manas has 2, but they're each on an individual vertical line. And Ger. And Ger is from the Anglo-Saxon Futhark. So, of the Elder Futhark, Raido, Berkana, and Manas were eliminated because, again, they had too much missing geometry here. Okay? And this left Thorizaz, Wanyo, and Ger. And Ger required mirroring geometry. So that eliminated Ger, and then this left Thorizaz and Wanyo. Come here. So when you had a neat connection with no further extension, so ultimately I chose 30 sas, and it is in its reversed or inverted form, because as we know 30 sas can be either or. And because the extension of Abby's upper body and the extension of the left leg made for a longer line, with the triangle more centrally located. So for Libby, I oscillated between the Elder Futhark runes of Gabo and Nautes and the younger Futhark R, because all three runes consist of just 2 lines. So ultimately the 2 lines of the runes meet somewhere in the middle here at a point of intersection, and the point of intersection would be up higher on the vertical line, so Gabo's more in the middle. I realize Nautes is too, but I've seen Nautes and R higher up too. So, and this is just more of an angle too. So, yeah, Gabo would have required too that Libby's right arm would need to mirror her left and be raised above her head. And Gabo would have probably also required a further distance between her legs here. So that leaves the Elder Rune Nautes versus the younger Futhark rune R. And structurally Nautes is R, but it's R inverted. So at this point I was like, you know what? I'm just going to interpret both of them. And also I'll say that, like the Hagalas in the Elder Futhark, Nautes has a way of being drawn inverted, mostly due to forgetfulness. Like, people forget that it's the upward left to downward right, and that's how most of the diagonal lines are, at least like between Hagalas and Nautes. So people tend to forget which way the diagonal direction moves, and that could be another thing to consider. We've got a lot of things to consider here. So this was basically just left over from the previous presentation, where there are other spellings of the Hagel. There's Hagalas. These were some variations of Hagalas. The Hagel means hailstone, like a stone of hail that comes from the sky. Thurizas, is in its reverse form here, and it basically translates to giant or thorn. And then basically, I'm just going over again, same ideas. They're a bit more thorough in the previous video, so I recommend going over there to read through this. But the Hagel basically is the hailstone. It does, it causes delay and disruption and disturbance to the land, but it can represent form. And I did include this in the other video, but there is this idea that if you make it into a hexagon, you contain it within the hexagon, that this symbol then becomes the symbol to create all other runes. And you can create all other runes from this hexagon of triangles, so to speak. So, yeah, and Hagel represents the form of the cosmos, the world tree. Hagel is structure. Hagel and Uruz often go together too, because Uruz is the creative force that provides Hagel its form. So it's the creative force that almost creates form. And then Hagel can also be associated, Hagalas, can also be associated with Thurisaz, because Thurisaz is a powerful destructive force which breaks down form. So while Uruz builds up form and builds the Hagel to what it is, Thurisaz is capable of breaking down form. So ultimately, this interpretation of the Hagel does not significantly differ from its elder predecessor, Hagelas. And Thurisaz was it was a very powerful rune that could cause a lot of damage, and it's it gets translated as thorn or giant, but it means chaos, destruction, devastation, and disruption, emotional volatility, hostility or a hostile environment, malignant or harmful forces, misfortune, powerful opposition and persecution, undermined safety and security, a threat to order, torment, weaponized power, and basically it represents the idea that if you need protection against, say, like in this case it was giants, if you need protection against giants, then you need a giant to protect you. So you're using measures that can come back and bite you in order to protect yourself. Okay? So it says desperation leading to desperate measures. You're willing to fight fire with fire. And it can be also utilizing this power to gain something for an immediate outcome. But, that it has the power to master misfortune, chaos, and destruction, but it should be handled very cautiously. And some practitioners consider it to be the most powerful aid in harmful rune magic. So it can quickly and easily backfire. And it may be the most dangerous rune in the whole Futhark, as it is detrimental to the established form and in opposition of the instinctual life urge. And so while we do see it in its Merkstave position, or inverted, however you want to call it, because it can be seen both ways, as reversed or inverted. But in its Merkstave position, it's an intensification of original concepts. Excuse me. So this was basically the metamorphosis of what I saw it becoming, if it was to become a bind rune. And it basically is just saying that it's more detailed in the other video, but it's basically saying Hagel to make the land or life unlivable, to terrorize into exile, a territorial curse of anxiety and dread. And then Merkstave, the Merkstave 30 says, to make the devastation excessively complete and irreversible. So, to me, I took this to be a curse of psychological torment and self-destruction meant to cause extreme distress. And then a thorough elimination of any imagined safety and security. To me, that seems very tormenting, very, this very exacerbated, awful level of torment that is unending and unceasing. And then this was just basically going over the stuff that I found with Libby. And this, of course, I go over in better detail in the previous video, but I've included R here from the Younger Futhark, which also has these other spellings of Gar, Ger, and Yara, which is very similar to the Elder Futhark Yara, meaning harvest, and it has a very interesting translation. It means a good year or plenty. So this possibly could have connections to Yara. And I've had people come to me and say, oh, this looks like it could be Yara. And I'm like, well, how so? Well, if you're making this connection, that actually makes a lot of sense. Also, I wanted to say too, while I did not include this large branch into the runic composition, it still would help shape the inverted urus, okay? But, I do believe this is meant to weigh down her arm so that it continues to touch the tree that is right here. And I will go over the F tree in a different video, but I would need to ask the opinion of someone who's actually seen the crime scene photos if they believe this branch is there for that purpose or if it needs to be factored in some way. Because the first thing that goes down looks like it's this large branch, and then the smaller sticks get placed over her. So, and then very briefly, I will say that the urus, this is a rune of strength, and so it's just this very raw, indestructible power or force, because like I said previously, it is the establishing force that creates the form of Hagel, okay? And then Hagel has every other runic shape within it. So it says, moving against overwhelming forces, if we were to read it in its Merkstave position, which this is not Merkstave, this is inverted or mirrored, okay? But we don't know how these people are deciding, or a person is deciding to represent the runes. Like I said, they can be doing it willy-nilly to confuse because that's like what makes sense to them. They're taking artistic license. Whatever the case is, we're seeing the urus not in its normal form. And so when it's upside down in its Merkstave position, it means to be moving against overwhelming forces, suffering devastating defeat, an unworthiness in the form of weakness, obsession, or domination. And when used against another, urus takes autonomy away from that person or subjugates them to such incredible internal or external forces that they don't bend, but rather break against those forces. And then Nautes, again, also inverted, but I'm also considering Yar, okay? Yara. So Nautes is need, being bound, constraint, distress, hard work, inability to act, a reset, resistance, urgency, a rune of fate with opposing aspects, both suffering and redemption, represents a need fire or a fire by friction, and the need fire could then, smoke out or purify harmful energies that had befallen the area, but it takes a long time to get a friction fire going. You have to be dedicated, and your hands won't come out, unscathed from that process. But it can also mean, when used against another, it renders that person powerless to change their situation. And so it was meant to limit abilities to frustrate belief in oneself and restrict successful outcomes. So, but it could be drawn or carried as a talisman because it helped defend against magical attachments or bindings. So again, another use of the rune meaning something not altogether fantastic, but then being used to avert the effects of those negative things that it's associated with. So, and then just briefly, R was, it most likely derives from the Elder Futhark Yara in meaning, not in shape. It does not look like its shape. But the younger Futhark rune, R, is a rune of good results, and it comes from the application of using our skills and knowledge at the proper time. So It says like the lush crops of a fall harvest resulting from the fertile soil and well-timed planting season. It is a rune of return. What you put in, you shall receive. So karma. And it can also be a rune of hopes and expectations, turning points, gradual changes, results of earlier actions, and it may relate to passages of time. So I found that interesting because that with the urus could also really make a case for, well, here, I'll just go over the possible bind rune meaning. So the Nauti is inverted is about binding or being bound or mired in self-sabotage, okay? The urus inverted is for weakness and humiliation. But if we were to say R instead of Nautis with the inverted urus, implies an abundance of weakness, humiliation, or physical suffering, if meant to be used as harmful magic. So those were some amendments that the one with Abby definitely needed to be made, but I figured, if I'm including all these other alphabets and all these other runic compositions, then I should look for them everywhere I can and insert them where I can. So that's what I've caught just now. I'm sure, like I've been saying, I'm gonna have to do a lot of presentations, just to kind of get out of my head what I think I am seeing. So this is my list of sources, guys, that I really found helpful. I would say Montfort, for somebody that's just learning, in my opinion, is probably the best to go for. And let's see. Paxton, did I not put? Oh, good. Yeah, Paxton, Diana Paxton. She is wonderful. I like hers a lot. And she includes the younger Futhark within the elder Futhark. Because, like I said, a lot of them, there's 16 younger Futhark to the 24 elder Futhark runes, and those can be found in most books since they overlap. But there are Anglo-Saxon sources, and I did not have time to go and get through those sources, and I actually need to purchase them. But that seems like it's a more complicated, maybe higher learning curve, and there aren't as many sources out on it. So I will probably have to wait. There is something that came out as of, I think, the summer 2023, which looks like it's really good. So I'll have to pick that apart. But I just want to thank you guys for, if anybody watched this and got through it and didn't die from boredom. I know these things can be very tedious, and I don't necessarily mean to go on about these things, but I want to explain my process as clearly as possible. I want to show you how I got to those conclusions that I am showing you, and then I think it's up to a lot of people, if they do follow this or if they do see the runes, to kind of interpret it what they see their way, because not everybody is going to see the same thing. I think a lot of people who have studied the runes could probably look at if they're seeing the same runes as I am and coming to the conclusion of, well, you have murdered kids here, okay, and you've put them out in a way that would definitely never be of their consent. In death you did not give them dignity. So of course everything is going to be negative around it, right? There's not going to be some silver lining to this. This is negativity to the extreme. And whether this is done to intimidate somebody, if it's a message for someone, overall it's clear that it was meant to be terrifying. Why else would you do this? And, to think that it has been 7 years. And I mean, basically, we just got this information, I think less than 6 months ago, to get a look into what for 6.5 years they, law enforcement had been withholding. And I get that it's an investigation and everything, but, there are very credible people that know their field and have spent their time in their field working on this. I'm thinking of like the Click, Ferenczi, Murphy trio, and all of the work that they put in. And this definitely just needs to be resolved. We definitely just need to see this through, and the investigation on these people with this angle at the Norse pagan, crime scene theory, it needed to just play out, and it needed to be followed through. But for whatever reason, it didn't. And so we're here, and we're looking at it, and we're examining it, and it's there, But I've rambled on too long. I really appreciate anybody that actually sat down and watched this. I always recommend watching my stuff at like 1.25 or 1.5 speed because, as you can probably tell, I'm not a natural born talker. But, at the end of the day, if I didn't do this, I don't know if I'd really be able to sleep. Like, just knowing that like I had this information in my brain and I didn't share it would be a shame, kind of thing. So, also I apologize for my voice and my cat. He is my buddy and he follows me around everywhere. So, he really wanted to sit on the computer right when I was doing this. So, I apologize for that. This is meant to be a serious subject, and I unfortunately am not good enough at editing yet to figure out ways of taking out some of these disturbances that happened. So again, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Have a good week, and hopefully I'll be coming to you sometime with a presentation. It does take a long time to research this stuff. I've got a lot of books to get through, which there are worse things, but it's also heavy sometimes too. So, but again, I appreciate your time, and I would love feedback. So thank you guys. I'll talk to you later.